Huntley, the Harlequin historical Undone, that came undone. Chapter 1. London 1816. Theodora's startled face came to rest with a painful thud in the centre of Shepherd's solid back. He lurched forward, but he was able to prevent the two of them from falling face first into Lady Darby's prickly holly bush. Once he was certain that whoever fell onto him had their footing, he turned around to see who was so determined to cause him mischief. The person that greeted him was somewhat familiar, striking, wide-eyed, apologetic, and decidedly lopsided. She had broken her heel in the fall, and despite his initial irritation, he had to smile. She smiled back at him from a face bright with embarrassment, then said, "I'm horrified, and it's my own fault." She frowned in displeasure, then pointed accusingly to the glass bowl near the edge of the garden's path before continuing. "Even if I could not see it, I should have known it was there." "I beg your pardon?" Shepherd asked in genuine confusion. "The bowl," she said irritably. Then she bent down as if to demonstrate, righted the bowl in question and returned the candle that had fallen out when she tripped over it. Theodora picked up her broken heel, then hobbled past Shepherd to a nearby garden bench. She sat down and pointed to the bowls with the lit candles near the path leading to the other garden path, then asked, "Would you be kind enough to fetch me one of those so I may better assess the damage done to my shoe?" "Not bowls. Candle holders. Imported from Venice," Shepherd informed her matter-of-factly. "Oh," said Theodora, now looking at him for the first time. Lord help her. It was Shepherd Monthermer, the future Marquis of Huntley and her host's nephew. From across the ballroom where she, Sonia and Violet had stood pretending not to ogle, he had been devastating. Now that all 6 feet of his exquisitely angular feline frame was within pouncing distance, he was damn near unbearable. In fact, from her vantage point, he was the devil himself sent to tempt her away from her fiancé and her good sense. It was sad, she thought, that such a pretty package should contain such a boorish snob. But maybe, just maybe, this was a sign of her good fortune. She should probably thank her lucky stars that his attractive packaging was contaminated, or heaven only knew what stupid thing she would have said. "My apologies, Lord Monthermer, but in my defence they do bear a rather strong resemblance to overlarge sweet bowls." She was pleased that she was able to keep her disappointment at his conduct from her voice, and even more so that she was able to sound truly apologetic. Then it was Shepherd's turn to stifle his disappointment in her. He liked the guileless way she had addressed him until she recognised who he was. Then it was, "My lord, this, and my lord, that." He much preferred it when she spoke to him the way she had before, as though he were an irritating friend. He brought her the candle so she could get a better look at her shoe, and then said, "That's precisely what I told my aunt earlier when she was instructing her footman on the correct placement of the silly things." For his attempt at bringing back the nature of their earlier conversation, Shepherd was rewarded with a smile and a rather cheeky statement. "Hence, the candle holders imported from Venice, I'm sure." "Just so," he agreed before adding conspiratorially, and this was immediately followed by her retraction of my invitation to tea. "Surely you jest." Well, in her defence, the withdrawal was induced under extreme provocation, for you see I broke one. Theodora could but laugh at the thought of the dignified Lady Darby, so moved to vexation she had to banish him from her sight. She barely had herself under control when he asked, "Why should you know that the paths leading to the garden would be lined on both sides with lit candles?" "Symmetry," she said, as if it were obvious. Symmetry. She could not, of course, be alluding to his aunt's obvious fixation with all things symmetrical, because if she were, God help him. I was, of course, referring to the palpable equilibrium that rules this palace's decor. Even the structure's very design exudes symmetry, Theodora said, as if she were annoyed at having to spell it out for him. "And well, you know it too." "Oh, don't even bother denying it. I can see you laughing at me." "I am not." "You are. See there, your shoulders are shaking." "Not at you, sweetheart. Shepherd said, his laughter filling the warm, aromatic spring air with the rich music of his baritone voice. He looked youthful and far more interesting when he laughed. Theodora could barely bring herself to look away, and to make matters worse, the poor lighting of the candles was casting a shadow on him that made the sharp angles of his face appear even more alluring. She stared openly at his crystal-clear blue eyes, shining dark and colourless by the small flame. She liked him laughing even if it was at her expense and wondered if he did it much. The little she knew of public persona was very dark, not brooding exactly. That description better suited his cousin Lord Harry Monthermer. Shepherd's expression read more of resolve and purpose, as if everything he did was towards a predetermined end. After he stopped laughing, Theodora said, "So, it lends to reason that if one side of a garden path attached to said house had bowls with lit candles, the—" "Venetian candle holders," Shepherd corrected. Theodora rolled her eyes, then said, "Then logically, the other side would also have Venetian candle holders, albeit unlit and dangerously close to the middle of the path. That being said, I can honestly say that I have no excuse and should have known it was there." "Naturally," Shepherd said thoughtfully. "A matter of simple deduction, really." Theodora smiled up at him, her clear grey eyes reflecting the warm flicker of the candle he held in his hands. Her smile seemed to be permanent. Even when she scolded him just then, she did so with a smile. He realised something else about her smile. The damn thing was contagious. From the moment she had collided with him, he had not stopped smiling. He liked her smile, loved the way it started in her expressive grey eyes, then radiated from her flawless skin to pull at her gorgeous lips. Her smile was marred now by a little frown in the centre of her brow as she examined her broken heel. He wanted her smiling face directed at him again, so he put the candle down and took the shoe and heel from her hand. He inspected it from one angle and then the next before giving her his diagnosis. "You will more than likely need a cobbler to repair the damages," he said judiciously. "Then I must leave at once," announced Theodora, her smile widening significantly, causing her eyes to sparkle. "To find a cobbler?" Shepherd asked, suddenly worried about her impending departure. That, and he was scarcely capable of rational thought with her smiling at him, with that wicked glint in her eyes. "Heavens no, I just don't want my obvious asymmetry to provoke any further mayhem." She took the shoe from his hand, slipped it on her foot, stuck out her legs and giggled. She laughed thus for a good minute, wholly oblivious to the effect the sound of her voice was having on poor Shepherd. He felt as if he had been set aflame and stupidly glanced down to where he had put the candle to make certain it had not somehow engulfed his feet. She consumed his senses as he sat in the rose garden, smelling only the sweet lily that radiated from her warm flesh. His eyes devoured every inch of her from the top of her honey tresses to the tips of her little broken shoe. She was all sumptuous curves from the firm round breasts, framed in the silk of her empire waist gown, glowing in the candlelight to the soft flare of her inviting hips, resting only a hair's distance from his on the stone bench. She was a goddess straight out of a Renaissance master's repertoire. She was smiling again. It was that smile, there now lingered on her face, that was the source of Shepherd's temporary madness. He was confident that he would most certainly perish from want if he did not possess the lips that wore that smile, and when she turned her face towards him, the smile still on her lips, he leaned down and kissed her. Despite his premeditation, once his lips touched hers, he was just as surprised as she was. His lips parted over hers and he became an open nerve completely susceptible to the rhythm of her very soul. The honesty of her response slowed his movement to where he felt his body was trying to memorize hers, this feeling, this moment. She was divine, and he worshipped her with all the skills he had available to him, and still despite it, he was possessed by her. He, with all his experience, consumed by this smiling maiden who seemed to have surrendered completely to his touch. It was as though her entire being responded to his touch. Her lips molded to his, causing a sort of heated friction before giving way to his tongue, hungry for access. Then she gave a little groan of appreciation, and he was undone, but she did not appear to have noticed, for she was coming apart herself. She was all feeling his mouth tender and hot on hers as he deepened their kiss. Then his tongue in her mouth produced a sensation pleasurable when it caressed hers. She was sure she would melt. He had ignited something deep in her, and it was urging her to be closer to him, to take ownership of her desire and peel back the layers of him, possess him the way he had done her. She ran her hands over the expanse of his wide, muscular chest and shoulder in order to anchor herself to him. Then he, in answer to her invitation, pulled her onto his lap and sliding his hands up her side to caress her breast. Theodora arched her back so Shepherd could have greater access, and he pressed his lips against the soft skin just above the neckline of her gown. Neither of them had intended this, and things were quickly getting out of control. For Christ's sakes, anybody could happen by and see them yet. Here they were, behaving as if they were in a world all their own. Then he took a breath, and she eased away some and looked him in the face, as if she was trying to determine who he was and how she got there. Shepherd smiled in commiseration, and she reached up and touched his cheek with her fingertips. Then her face changed. She was lucid again. Then she pulled her hand away from his face, looked him square in the eyes, and said, "Forgive me." She rose to her feet, turned and walked away, leaving a slightly dazed Shepherd to stare at her departing back. It took him 2 full breaths to collect himself, and by the time he made to follow her, his Aunt Gertrude appeared out of nowhere with her complaints about his absence from the ballroom. "You swore to me you would make an attempt with Lady Eloise and keep your grandfather in hand, yet here you are hiding in peace while he wears at my patience with his antics. What could he have done in the quarter of an hour I was gone from his side? He created a spectacle, ripping that idiot Powis's lorgnette from his hand and crushing it underfoot, that's what. Good for him. I've always disliked Powis scrutinizing me through that awful thing. He has ruined my ball, and when I told him so, he ordered his carriage and left. Maybe that's for the best. Are you mad? Haven't you been listening to me? He caused a scene and ruined your cousin's debut. Now, my dear, surely it wasn't as bad as all that. There have long been whispers of his deteriorating capacity, and after this bit of madness, people will more than likely think him as mad as King George. That may be, but he is still the Marquis of Huntley, your father, and the head of this family. Shepherd ground out, his tone punishing and unyielding. I will not be made to feel the villain when I was the party dealt the injury. He's your responsibly, and I'll thank you to keep that in mind when next you and he are invited in my home, she said before stalking off back towards the house. Then she stopped suddenly to add, You're expected to dance at least once with Eloise before this evening comes to an end. Damn it, thought Shepherd. He could not now pursue his enchantress if his grandfather had indeed behaved as badly as his aunt claimed. He'd have to go assess the damages and possibly pay remuneration for the damages suffered. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as his Aunt Gertrude had made it out to be, and the only real damage was done to him, for he was unable to locate the beauty from the garden. Chapter 2. By the morning, that solitary kiss had transformed itself into one of those monumental events. The kind designed for the sole purpose of throwing one's life off its natural axis. Theodora was suddenly full of all sorts of doubt, questions, and by the time her parents roused the next morning, she had also resolved, several times, to call off the wedding. How, she lamented, could she now marry Daniel knowing that she would be keeping them both from a life filled with passionate kisses? Well, at least that's what she thought at 2 o'clock, and then again at 5. But now, as the sun raised over the horizon, she wasn't so sure. After all, she and Daniel had been friends their entire life and had agreed to marry due to her advancing age and his lack of fortune. How could she now leave him in a lurch for one kiss with an unattainable gentleman who would not give her a second thought in the cold light of day. She had no delusions of her reality. She was 27, and until last night, she had never been kissed, not even by Daniel, to whom she had been engaged for a full year. And so it was that at 7 o'clock, she resolved that she would rouse her maid and send her with a note to Daniel's residence. She had never kept a secret from him, and she wasn't going to start now that they were to marry. She would tell him of the kiss and then ask him to kiss her. See if they couldn't create their own passion. She waited a full 2 days for Daniel to call before sending another note, but he never came. And then it was Friday, and time for her to go with her parents to Bath in order to prepare for the wedding. She wondered what had kept him from coming, but did not despair, for she knew he was to follow them to Bath the following week. 2 weeks later, she was officially worried, for she hadn't heard from Daniel and the wedding guests were starting to arrive. She fretted that some ill had befallen him and went to her father with her concerns. "Papa, I want you to send someone to London to see if all is well with Daniel," she said frantically upon entering her father's library. A dark oak affair with a bookcase encasing the walls all around, broken by 2 very large windows and a fireplace to the right of the desk at the centre of the room. "Of course he's well, my angel," her father said without bothering to look up from his letters. "Now, stop your worrying and come read this letter for me. See if you can make any sense of these scratches your brother has used as words in his note." She took the letter, scanned her brother's scribbling, then said, "He'll be here on the morning of the wedding, but we are not to wait if he's late." "And did he say why that was?" "No, but he did say he was bringing Winnie and Jack, so I can only assume they are off someplace more entertaining than Bath in the spring," she said with a fond smile. "I grow tired of those 3 and their antics," the Viscount said irritably. "Now, Papa, you really shouldn't allow Finn to provoke you so." "I know. Now come, my dear. Sit and tell me what's bothering you." "I haven't seen or heard from Daniel in well over a fortnight, and I'm worried something might have happened to him," she said, after taking the chair across from her father's desk. "Your Daniel is a reliable fellow, Teddy, but even he would want to have a last hurrah before settling into a life of marriage and responsibility." "Yes, I suppose that could well be it. Still, there was a matter I had hoped to discuss with him before the wedding. Shall I send a note to have him call here the instant he arrives in Bath?" "Yes, please," she said with bright smile before rising to kiss her papa's cheek in gratitude. 3 days later, she was lying in bed contemplating going for a ride before the household roused to make the final preparations for her wedding day, when she heard the carriage pull into the driveway. It was the perfect time for a morning ride, but a most inappropriate hour for making social calls. She rushed to the window in time to see her future mother-in-law, Baroness Somerset, step down from her carriage outside her parents' front doors. Good Lord, something had happened to Daniel. That, or he'd gotten cold feet and had decided to abandon her on her wedding day. She should have guessed as much when he didn't call after her father sent a note. No, that's impossible, he would never do such a thing. It was more likely that he found out that she had been kissed by that rake-hell, Lord Monthermer, and challenged him to a duel in defence of her honour. Yes, that was it. He was dead and she had killed him with her recklessness. She should never have left London without first speaking with Daniel. She owed him the truth. In fact, she should have told her parents. Now all she could do was face the music. There was a flurry of movement in the family quarters outside her parents' doors, and then the noise retreated for the stairs. Theodora said a quick prayer begging God to look after her dear friend Daniel. Then she ran to her dressing room and flung open the trunk her maid had packed for her wedding trip and dressed as quickly as possible. She was searching for slippers in another trunk when the door to the dressing room swung open. From the moment the carriage pulled into her parents' driveway, 100 horrible thoughts had filled her mind, but now, as her mother stood before her, she realized that the only thing she needed to hear was that Daniel all right. She knew she could deal with anything so long as he was well. So she asked her mother, "Is he all right?" When her mother nodded in the affirmative, she was rewarded with a hug so fierce it robbed her of breath. When Theodora finally released her mother, both their faces were soaked with tears. Theodora wept in relief while her mother wept for her sweet daughter. Now that Theodora knew Daniel was well, she wanted to know the reason for the Baroness's early morning visit. Before she could inquire, her mother said, "Your father and Baroness Somerset are waiting for us in the library." She found her slippers, and after a rapid descent of the marble staircase, she entered the library with her mother. Upon their entrance, her father came around his desk and took her hand before he seated her on the chair next to the Baroness. Whatever it was that brought the Baroness here now hung in the space between the four occupants of her father's library like grim death. Theodora exchanged salutations with the Baroness, then looked to her father for an explanation. Before he spoke, he glanced at her mother, who immediately came to stand beside her. Then, in a voice laced with such empathy for his daughter, he said, "Daniel and Violet eloped a week ago in Scotland." It couldn't be true. She saw Daniel in London 3 weeks ago. She had been there with her mother shopping for her trousseau, and he was nervous about taking his father's seat at the House of Lords. Theodora offered him her love and complete support, and she was thrilled that she was able to practice her wifely skills before the wedding. Besides, he was her oldest friend. Why would he now decide to run off with Violet? She had always been a practical sort, not at all prone to hysterical or erratic behaviour. She took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, then said to the room at large, "If it is all the same to you, I would prefer to hear this from Daniel." Then she stood, kissed her mother's cheek, curtsied to her father and the Baroness, then headed for the door. "Will a letter penned in his own hand suffice, my dear?" the Baroness inquired. Without even turning around to face her, Theodora said, "No, it will not, for you see your son and I were friends before there was anything else." She took another step and reached for the door handle when her father said, "It's true, my girl." This time she did turn around, but her answer remained the same. "From his lips, Papa." "Very well, you shall have it," her father said, in a tone so laced with menace it made the Baroness shiver. "We still have a house full of wedding guests that must be told," her mother said tentatively. "What is the proper protocol in this kind of situation, do you suppose?" Theodora asked. "For instance, am I allowed to go for a long ride, then have a hot bath before informing my wedding guests that there will be no wedding today?" Her mother was the first to respond to Theodora's query. "A hot bath is always a lovely idea." She said this brightly, not wanting to disappoint her daughter by saying no to the ride, but feeling certain it was a bad idea for her to be alone under the circumstances. "I shall ring for one to be brought to your chambers immediately," her mother said, and made to match action to word when the Baroness stood, cleared her throat, apologised to Theodora once more, then attempted a hasty retreat. But Theodora's mother insisted on walking her to the front door. While her mother was seeing to the distressed Baroness's safe departure, her father said, "If you hurry, you can go for that ride before your mother is able to stop you." Theodora kissed him for understanding. Then she ran to her dressing room as quickly as her feet could take her, fully intending on dragging on her old, comfortable riding habit, then riding until her mind was completely at rest. But as soon as the door swung open, she saw her neatly packed trunks lined up for what was to be her wedding trip, and then on to the Somerset estate with Daniel for her happy ever after. It struck her still. She stood there for a quarter of an hour staring at the luggage before her mother came bustling in. 2 hours later, in the great hall of her father's country seat, she stood wedged between her mother and older brother Henry as her father addressed all guests present for the wedding. After the announcement, there was an entire hour's worth of discussion as to the best course of action to take. There were a few who believed that she should marry right away by special license, and someone even suggested her late cousin Claire's widower as a potential groom. In the end, the only matter they were all able to agree on was her immediate return to the Ton. For a scandal of this magnitude, left unchecked, could result in irrevocable damage to her reputation. Though they needn't have bothered for, as luck would have it, A week later, when they returned to London, the Tun was already abuzz with some other juicy gossip. Harry Monthermer, the youngest grandson of the Marquis Huntley, had generated a scandal all his own. Everybody knows the first rule of polite society is that the hierarchy rules in all things, especially in gossip. So right then, the only way Theodora could even make an imprint on the collective consciousness of the beau monde was if she somehow found herself in an illicit affair with no less than the Prince Regent. For absolutely no one cared that Viscount Cromwell's daughter was abandoned on her wedding day when there was a horse caper that nearly killed the Marquis. Chapter 3. In an attempt at forgetting his kiss with his mystery woman, Shepherd went to see his mistress. If anyone could help him forget his brief encounter with Theodora, it would be the dexterous Jezebel. Shepherd liked his mistress. She had a quiet strength and honest devotion on which he had come to rely. Jezebel had been his mistress for the last year, and in that time she had listened to him and supported him through one family crisis after another. Still, he could not truly call her a friend, for he did not know her well enough for that. Their relationship had always been about his needs and her ability to take care of them. Jezebel was brilliant at what she did, and soon he was sleeping contently beside her salacious body. Even so, as he slept, he dreamt only of Theodora's smiling, heart-shaped face. And that was when he realized that he would have to end his relationship with Jezebel. Despite her many and varied talents, he had been able to think of only one woman, and Shepherd simply could not continue his life in that vein. Shepherd had only just fallen into that part of sleep where one's body is completely at rest, when he felt a familiar presence enter the room. He knew that Harry was standing at the foot of the bed, even before he was fully awake. Just as Harry knew he was awake now, even though he had not yet moved his body or opened his eyes. It had always been that way with the cousins, an unspoken kinship bred from their shared attempt to understand one another. Shepherd remained lying motionless and waited for trepidation to consume his consciousness, but it never came. Yet, he knew that for Harry to disturb him in this particular venue at this hour, it would have to be for a reason far greater than death. This could only mean one thing: his most recent attempt at emancipation from the tyranny of their lunatic grandfather had undoubtedly landed him at the centre of some scandal. "Good morning, Harry," Shepherd said, his smooth baritone greeting more question than salutation, and followed by a pause not long enough to be filled by anyone but the speaker. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" This particular pleasure was laced with a deliberate warning. Harry smiled at the warning, then returned his cousin's salutation with such elation and bravado that it put him in mind of a child's exuberance at Christmas, but it was done so that all he could do was stifle his groan and give himself a swift mental kick. Nonetheless, it did the trick, changing the atmosphere of the room from one charged with Shepherd's contained worry to one brimming with his unbridled joy, and it got Shepherd up. In one decisive movement, Shepherd leapt from the bed, dragged on his trousers and gathered the rest of his clothes before saying, "I'll meet you below stairs in 5 minutes." Without once permitting himself to wonder at the reason for Harry's early morning excitement, Shepherd washed, dressed, and joined his cousin in the little green French-style sitting room at the front of his mistress's townhouse. Harry was still sorting out the details that brought him there into a precise enough language when Shepherd entered the room with a solicitous smile on his handsome face. Harry despised that particular expression. It never failed to call to mind their controlling grandfather. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Shepherd always resembled the Marquess. They both did. All the Monthermers were blessed with exquisitely symmetrical features and hair, the colour of jet. The combination could be exceedingly intimidating even on their grandfather, with his now distinguished silver locks. But it was Shepherd, with his warm, smiling blue eyes, that most resembled the old man. Logical Shepherd, precise as a mathematical equation, tall and lean with the sums of his necessary parts adding up to a magnificent whole. He was all seamless ratios with wide shoulders, and ideally narrow hips, down to a disposition that reflected the multifaceted tapestry that was his life, as influential restrained lord of the peerage, compassionate philanthropist, and devoted patriarch. He was simply a striking man who came more into his own way of being with each passing year. Then again, Shepherd was also Lucifer, an enigmatic lord who smiled only to coerce compliance in the face of opposition. This was the real reason Harry detested that aforementioned smirk and the pompous older thus wiser look that came along with it. He stood directly across from Harry, looked him straight in the eye and said, "Right, let's have it." Harry took a deep breath and then said to his cousin in a tone far more becoming a gentleman, "I lost Chiron Hurd in a wager against the Marquis Hereford that I could penetrate the armour that protected the daughters of Howe. Asinine, so far removed from brilliance that it borders on mental retardation," Shepherd said in an attempt to intimidating Harry into recanting. Halfway through it, the futility of the entire thing dawned on him. After all, the damage was done. The only thing he could do now was help Harry find a solution before their grandfather got wind of it. Shepherd looked to a Harry who was clearly oblivious to his own plight and was still rambling on about his perceived brilliant victory. Though Shepherd was certain his face was showing signs of his distaste for the conversation, Harry continued to prattle on about his ill-conceived wager with Hereford, as if he were an imbecile. The wager, as far as Shepherd understood it, was rather straightforward. Harry was to arrange 5 consecutive public meetings with each of the eligible daughters of Lord Howe at the locations specified by the Hereford. If Harry was successful, Hereford would hand over enough gold sovereigns for him to purchase 10 captains' commissions in the regimental foot guards. If he failed, Harry would immediately turn over the Marquess of Huntley's 8 identical grey horses. "When will you inform the Marquess?" "He already knows," Harry said nonchalantly. "I thought you said I was the first to know." "You are." "You're not making any sense, Harry," Shepherd snapped irritably. "Gerald is outside," Harry said as he watched his grandfather's man walk towards the front door. It turned out that Harry's little stunt had caused their grandfather to suffer one of his little events and had taken to his bed. Shepherd was convinced the old man was only pretending to have an episode and told Harry as much. Even so, Harry was having a difficult time accepting what he felt he had done and had spent the last 2 weeks packing up his Belgrave Square residence, vowing to anyone who would listen about his intent to spend the rest of his days in exile in America. Now Shepherd was going to Belgrave to have breakfast with his tormented cousin in hopes of convincing him otherwise. As he headed south in a short cut through Hyde Park from the residence he shared with his grandfather in Connaught Square, he happened on Theodora. She was out for an early morning ride with her intimidating groom and nearly fell off her horse when he entered the path and demanded a moment. She dismounted with dignity and handed her mount to the groom before preceding Shepherd off the path through dew-damp grass. Shepherd followed her in silence for several steps, half expecting her to disappear like some mythical nymph when she suddenly stopped, and without turning around said, "My heart is doing all it can to escape its confines, only I can't tell if it's from fear or joy." "You have nothing to fear from me," he assured her, and she turned with a melancholy smile that broke his heart. By the light of the early morning sun, she was a feast for the senses. She was a lavish beauty bathed in warm golden rays. Standing there thus, he thought her to be Lilith, sinful and plenty. She was an ocular ecstasy, filling him with thoughts of slow-poured honey, there with her pensive stare, warm glowing skin, pink full lips, and rich golden locks. He had a million things he wanted to say, questions he wanted answered, but none of them came to mind there with her looking at him with something like guarded delight. Then she smiled and said, "I'm currently too filled with misery to take anything but joy from your presence." Shepherd wanted to ask why she was so unhappy, to offer her words of comfort to make her smile the way she had when first they met. but he did feel the change, for she stepped forward and asked, "Are you very warm?" It was a strange thing to ask, and when he opened his mouth to answer, she interjected with heartbroken whisper, "I asked only because you look to me, as warm comfort ought to, and I wondered if you would hold me a while, just long enough for me to find some equilibrium." What could he do? He held her close until she sighed with contentment. Her face was buried in his torso, and when he dragged his hand over her spine in a soothing caress, she tightened her hold around his waist and nestled closer. Then all the tension fell away from her body, and she was alive in his arms. She, now warm from where his heat burned along the places where their bodies clung, in a sweet embrace ran her hand up under his jacket and sunk her nails into his back. Shepherd stood still expectantly while she pulled from his flesh want and built desire in him. Then she lifted her face with passion-filled grey eyes that pleaded, and he kissed her lips selflessly, offering self and comfort. His lips, masterful and silky, tender on hers, while his tongue, hot and nurturing, coaxed away her hurt. She took all he had to offer. He was lost in her and her despair, tasting her tears in their kiss. He lifted his head to search her face with the hope that he could banish whatever it was that had her so sick at heart. She smiled bravely, and he wiped her face dry with a compassionate hand. He opened his mouth once more to offer her comfort when she turned suddenly toward the sound of hooves in the distance. "I cannot be discovered here alone with you," she said frantically, and then her groom was at her side with their horses. Shepherd could hardly believe it when she mounted her mare and rode off once more without giving him her name, direction, or explanation. Tomorrow, he vowed, he would go to his Aunt Gertrude after he had seen to Harry, so that when he rose, he would have a name to go with the girl that haunted his dreams. "I finally killed him," Harry said once he and Shepherd were seated in a serviceable breakfast room on the east side of the stylish Belgrave Square townhouse. "Harry, for the love of God, he's 76 years old. Besides, I told you I think he's pretending to force me into marriage." "I know how old he was, Shepherd, but Gerald told me his physician said, 'This is idiotic. Don't flatter yourself. You couldn't kill him even if you tried. He survived the death of both his wives, 3 of his 5 children, and our adolescents," Shepherd stated dismissively. "Don't you dare make light of what I did." "What exactly have you done?" "This is tiresome," Harry said unhappily. "I've made up my mind. I'm going to America." "Go to America if you must, but before you go, tell me why you didn't leave before now," Shepherd asked belligerently. "You know Grandfather wouldn't let me." "That's absolute nonsense. You are independently wealthy and have been so your entire life. You stayed because you are as fond of him as I. That is the only reason we allowed him to hold us so close. He did not rob us of our independence, we gave it to him. After our fathers died, something in him died along with them, and we tried to repair it by assuring him with our proximity." "An exceptionally astute observation, Shepherd," Harry said contemptuously. "It's moments like these that give me a true appreciation for your advanced knowledge and age." "Come now," Shepherd said in a smug, superior voice. "Even with your limited understanding, you can see my rationale." "Of course," Harry proclaimed with mock enlightenment. "I didn't give him heart failure. We all did." "It makes absolute sense. So as my accomplice, you should come with me to America. In fact, I think we should bring the entire family. After all, with the exception of Aunt Gertrude, we all brought him to a weakened state with our proximity." "You damn well know that our proximity did not injure him so much as it hindered us," Shepherd spat back combatively. "Even if I know it, it does not change the facts. He is still bedridden, and I must leave." "I know," Shepherd said with miserable acceptance. "I'll go now and talk to Grandfather." "Yes, all right, I'll follow shortly." It was imperative for Harry to have his own life, and Shepherd would have to get the old man to see that. They both owed him that for 10 years ago, When Shepherd, 18, and Harry, 17, were called down from Oxford because of the Marquis's failing health, Harry sacrificed his independence to help restore the title Shepherd would one day inherit. They had come home to Brighton only to realise that the estate had fallen into decline, and without a shrewd eye, there to oversee the day-to-day management, their greedy relations would soon bleed them dry. The Marquis had a brilliant steward, but he was almost 60 and quite ill-equipped at dealing with the parasitic members of their family. He was, however, able to guide them through the maze of paperwork and make them knowledgeable enough to run the estate before retiring. This would not have been a problem on its own, but add in the greedy relations, an estate in decline, the war, and a Marquis hell-bent on interfering only when he was certain, it would make matters worse, and you have the makings of a grand disaster. As heir to the title, Shepherd was able to curtail the vultures who did not want to risk the rancour of the future Marquis. He was even able to stop the estate's decline and to keep his grandfather in check. What he was not able to do, however, was all this and generate new ventures to keep the estate thriving. He was not yet Marquis, and he needed a capable ally. Thus, Harry's appointment as temporary steward and ultimately his reason for wanting to leaving for America now. It seemed the perfect solution for everyone involved. The three of them fulfilling the role of one, it worked like a dream, and in less than 4 years, the cousins had not only restored the estate to its former glory, they had also doubled the family's net worth. Then, add to that, the Marquis' health mending to the point where he was able to take on a few of his duties. And it would be easy to see why Harry thought it the perfect time for him to purchase a commission and pursue an occupation more befitting a gentleman of his birth and station. Shepherd was in total agreement and was prepared to purchase Harry's commission when the Marquis first voiced his reservations. When he realised that his qualms were not cutting muster with his grandsons, he resorted to blackmailing them with threats of his impending death. It worked until Shepherd vowed to make it a reality if he did not cease and desist at once, which led to Harry's stunt and the Marquis's failing health, or so they thought. When Shepherd arrived at their home in Connaught, it was to find his shame-faced grandfather stuffing his face. "What is the meaning of this?" Shepherd demanded. "Gerald was to warn me of your return and help me to bed to make the ruse convincing," the old man said without shame. "So there is nothing the matter with you?" "If you call having to return to the marriage mart because my grandson refuses to do what is required of him nothing, then no. But my heart is nonetheless broken after having to suffer the humiliation of going to Almack's at my age. What the devil are you going on about?" "Duty," the Marquis barked. "I will do my duty and marry so I can produce an heir who is fitting. Then you and your damnable cousin can go off and get yourselves murdered." Shepherd's answer to his grandfather's little tirade was a statement not really intended to garner a response, since he truly believed it to be a statement of fact. "The devil! I am not senile." "Fletcher did it, and he's my age," argued the Marquess. "First of all, Fletcher is 20 years younger than you are, which leads me to believe that your mind has deteriorated farther than I originally suspected," Shepherd mocked. "It matters little what you believe so long as the ton believes it," the Marquis scoffed. "That's extortion," Shepherd shot back in disgust. "I know," laughed the Marquis. "Well, I won't stand for it, and neither will Harry. Still, there are your aunts to consider, and they each have a daughter out this season, don't they?" "You know they do," Shepherd spat. "Conduct, my lord," chided the Marquis in perfect delight. That did it. Shepherd's only objective now was murder. He took 2 very deliberate steps towards his fool of a grandfather and fixed a menacing smile on his face. He stood in front of the old man's desk and glared down at him, his entire persona now reading organised fury, and that is when Harry walked in. He looked at both men, smiled, then said, "Alibi or saviour? How will history remember me after this conflict, I wonder?" It was rhetorical, of course, but it did the trick. His grandfather looked visibly relieved, and Shepherd, well, he still looked murderous. Only now he was doing so from the other side of the room, out of arm's reach of his grandfather's neck. "This will lighten your moods considerably," said Harry, "especially yours grandfather. For once you were right. Lord Powis's dependency on that damned lorgnette has finally caught up to him. He swears that he saw you leaving Almack's last night. There is nothing wrong with Powis's bloody eyesight. He was there last night," Shepherd snapped. "He was looking for a wife." "Whose wife?" Harry inquired. "My wife," informed the Marquis. "You don't have a wife," the cousins replied in unison. "Hence Almack's," snarled the Marquis peevishly. With a look of genuine concern clouding his beautiful face, Harry turned to Shepherd, pointed to his grandfather and asked, "Do you suppose this could be the onset of senility?" This too was my initial reaction when he gleefully informed me of his little outing, but I'm afraid something far more sinister is afoot. "My leaving?" Harry asked. "Of course, and he means to get his way. What will this cost me? That I am not yet privy to." "The cheek!" bellowed the Marquis furiously. "Let's have it, grandfather. What will it take for you to let Harry go?" Shepherd asked resignedly. "I was not aware that he was being held prisoner," spat the irksome Marquis. "Out with it, old man," commanded Shepherd. "All I ask is that you both perform your duty to this family," said their long-suffering grandfather. "What duty might that be, sir?" demanded Shepherd. "Your duty to marry and produce heirs, of course," the old man informed them irritably. "Once you have done so, then you may do as you please." "That could take years, besides having a family changes everything." "Doing what one pleases would no longer be an option," Shepherd pointed out. "That is curious," said the Marquis contemplatively. "For you have a family now, and yet you do as you please." "If that had been the case, we would not be having this conversation," interjected Harry angrily. "Your argument is flawed, sir. For as the second in line of succession to this title, my duty is to king and country." The conversation was starting to take a toll on the Marquis, who now looked physically exhausted and every bit his 76 years. He put his hand on his brow and closed his eyes before saying, "I lost 2 sons in service to king and country, and I will be damned if I'm going to lose a grandson as well." He got to his feet, looked them both square in the eyes and said, "I would sooner die than put one more of my offspring in the ground." Both Shepherd and Harry knew it to be true. He turned, walked from the room, and was immediately taken in hand by his man Gerald, who seemed to have appeared from out of thin air to assist his master back to his chambers where he could rest and recover from his ordeal. It took Shepherd almost a full week to get his grandfather to agree to a compromise that would satisfy everyone involved. According to the agreement, Shepherd, as the heir apparent, would marry and procure an heir in a period less than 1 year. Once he married and his bride was with child, the Marquess, as a sign of good faith, would give Harry his blessing to purchase a commission. To this end, Shepherd enlisted the aid of his Aunt Gertrude to locate the beauty from her garden, but had to turn to his cousin Cynthia after Gertrude flat out refused due to her loyalty to Lady Eloise Spencer, the girl she felt he ought to marry. Cynthia was reluctant to help him for fear Gertrude would get wind of it and sent him to Lady Hurwitch, a known gossip and all-around busybody. Lady Hurwitch asked for description of the maiden, but only after she had him swear it would not get back to Gertrude that the information came from her. He promised, then offered this descriptions. A lady of about 23, fair of hair and eyes, buxom almost to the point of plenty. Oh, and taller than the average maiden, standing at about 5.5 feet. To this, Lady Hurwitch said, "That my lord is Miss Theodora Cromwell, recently jilted bride, and long past her 23rd year." He thanked her, and she made him swear once more that it would not get back to Gertrude that the information came from her. A week after their second kiss, Theodora was in her mother's grand salon, suffering pitied glances from her mother and a few her relations when their morose butler Kendall entered with a summons from her father to join him in his library. She rose with open glee and followed him into the hallway and down the stairs. Her dear papa. He was saving her from their sympathetic rumblings and happy banter by offering her a quiet place like he had done nearly a dozen times in the 2 weeks since their return to London. There was now a constant rotation of her well-meaning relation loitering in her mother's sitting room, offering her cheer and constant companionship. It was starting to make her homicidal, but just at the moment when she started to seriously contemplate lacing their tea with poison, her papa would rescue her. It was with this thought and wide smile she entered her father's library to find Lord Shepherd Monthermer in company with her papa. The two rose when she entered and her father came round his desk and took hold her hand with a, "There you are, my dear." "Good afternoon, papa," she asked with doubtful glance at Shepherd. "Well, that all depends on whether or not you are willing to consider marriage to Monthermer here," her father said with expectant smile. "Yes, Miss Cromwell, I've asked your father for your hand and pray you'll do me the honour," Shepherd said with charming smile. "Marriage?" she asked once more, to much concern from her poor papa. "Teddy, are you all right?" "I'm well, papa, thank you," she said with a weak smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "But I wonder will you give me a moment alone with his lordship?" "Now, Theodora," her father said with knitted brows. "Just a brief moment, papa," she said with bright, pleading smile that made her father instantly suspicious. "Will you kindly tell me what's going on here?" her father demanded. "I'm not yet certain myself," she said without taking her eyes from his. "But if you would grant me a moment—" "Yes, you said," her father said with furious glare to Shepherd before turning back to his daughter and added, "All right, you may have your moment. I'll go inform your mother." "Thank you," she said before walking him to the door, which she set on its hinge before turning back to Shepherd to demand he tell her his reason for coming. "Let's have it." "Will you not come here and sit with me?" he asked with an easy smile. "Out with it, my lord, or as sure as you stand there, I'll have you removed from these premises." "I want you to marry me." "Who has put you up to this?" "Pardon?" Shepherd asked in genuine confusion. "It's cruel. Surely you see how awful it is," she said, her voice but a whispered. "I've been humiliated enough for a lifetime, and this is more than malicious, it's criminal." Her voice broke, and Shepherd was at her side with kind hand on her arm. He had heard of her abandonment from that chatterbox Lady Howich, and had been at once relieved for himself and furious at Somerset for his rotten conduct. She straightened her shoulders at his show of sympathy. She had already shed tears in front of him over Daniel and Violet's betrayal, and she would be damned if she was going to do so again. "Forgive me," she said, some of her equilibrium returning. "Of course," he said graciously. "Thank you. Would you rather I call again when you're better disposed?" "Heavens, no," she said with grateful smile. "I don't want you leaving here when there is clearly a matter we ought to address." "Then you will sit with me a while?" "Yes, if only to understand your reason for coming and offering marriage to a virtual stranger," she said, before preceding him to the chair directly in front her father's desk. Shepherd turned his chair so he faced her, then he said, "It's become necessary for me to marry, and the instant it did, I thought only of you as the possible bride." "I hardly know how to respond," she said bewilderedly. "Say you'll marry me." "My lord, I'd much rather you called me Shepherd," he said with wicked grin. "Shepherd," she said with accommodating smile. "My life is a tragedy, and I would gladly marry you if only to stop my family's pitied glances, but I don't mind telling you how terrifying I find the prospect of marrying a complete stranger after being so sorely disappointed by two people I knew for a lifetime. There is an opportunity here for your tragedy to be a triumph, and all you have to do to make it so is trust me to take care of you." "And you will trust me to do the same?" "Yes, absolutely," he said without pause. "Then you will trust me with your truth?" "How do you mean?" "Tell me why it's so important you marry now and why it is I was your only possibility," Not only possibility, but the only one I thought of as possible bride, he corrected before proceeding to reveal to her every last detail of his little melodrama. From the sudden death of his father and uncle to his grandfather's complete heartbreak at their loss, and his failed attempt to see them all well to Harry's detriment. I can't imagine the Marquis drinking warm lemonade at Almack's, she said with barely contained laughter. You don't have to imagine it. You could go see for yourself. He's been in attendance there every Wednesday since his failed attempt at feigning heart failure was discovered. Has he? Yes, I just said, Shepherd said peevishly, and you needn't bother pretending not to be amused, for I would laugh at me too if I were you. Not at you, I promise, she said with little giggle. It's just that I keep imaging him having to dance with some 18-year-old as her mamma. Smiles on encouragingly from the fringes of the ballroom. There is something very wrong with you, he said, and laughed in spite of it all. He recovered first from their shared laugh and took the time while she regained her equilibrium to study, by the light of day, this woman that had so captivated him. She was beautiful, golden and womanly. He couldn't help but stare. What's the matter? She asked, once he found herself and realized that he was watching her. You're beautiful. You needn't resort to exaggerated flattery in order to convince me, you know. Here now, said an affronted Shepherd. I don't know what sort of cad you take me for. You are beautiful, and I said it for I thought so and for no other reason. I was never pretty. Of course you weren't, and that's because you are beautiful, he said confidently. Pretty fades with youth as a rose in the rain, whilst beauty like yours remains a lifetime thanks to brilliant bones, fine features and charismatic smile. You, my dear, are beyond vogue. You are a masterpiece. 100 years from now, when we are old married people, you must not think I accepted your offer due to your lovely words, she said with gleeful smile. You will marry me? Yes. And will you tell me why you've suddenly agreed to have me, if not for my singing praise to your appeal? You are pleased I've agreed, she said suddenly, too self-conscious to admit her real reason for accepting his offer. More than I can express. Now tell me why you have agreed, he said while leaning in so his knees touched hers and she flushed. I'd be too embarrassed to say. Shall I guess? He asked this time, taking hold of her hand and bringing it to his lips. Theodora watched near breathlessly as he kissed first her knuckles, palm and then the inside of her wrist, all while holding her eyes as he asked, Is it because you have a good heart and hate to see me suffer the vipers at Almack's alongside my grandfather? She was having trouble forming words with him looking at her thus, and could only shake her head like a simpleton. He smiled, encouraged before leaning in so his lips was at her ear, then he, his warm breath crawling over her sensitive skin as his hand travelled up her bare arms and said, I know. It's so you can have foreknowledge of my Aunt Gertrude's candle holder placements. This time she managed an uh-huh, and he, with smiling lips, kissed her from earlobe to chin before pulling back some to hold her eyes, his hands now on both sides of her face. This time with a predatory gaze, and his thumb slowly dragging over her lips, he asked, And you are certain it is not because I sang praises to your allure? She sighed and bit at her bottom lip, where his thumb had caressed, and he edged close as if to kiss her, then said, Well, I can't think what it could be, so I'll go now and return once I have another guess, unless... Yes? Oh, she speaks, he said with a wicked grin, his lips still but a breath from hers. Shepherd? Yes, sweetheart. I'd like to be kissed before Papa returns, she said with calm voice and violent flush. Then you should have done and kissed me. I don't know how. Of course you do, he said with provocative whisper. You need but kiss me the way you'd like to be kissed, and take care that you don't leave me behind when you do. It was precisely the right thing to have said, to build in her the confidence to express her want on his flesh. She kissed him with the vigour of a zealot and the appetite of a glut, her eager little fingers running through his thick jet black to drag and over his tender scalp, while she nibbled, tasted, and devoured his mouth. Her consummation was almost aggressive as she greedily robbed him of breath and control with the intensity of her desire. Her want for him seemed without end, and he was left feeling at once heady and weightless at her worship. It also gave her the advantage, which was not an entirely undesirable scenario as far as Shepherd was concerned, particularly since it felt so damn good, but there was the matter of that unanswered question, and that he did mind. He was left vulnerable with his want for her, and was desperate to have her as exposed as he was. He wanted to know something of her heart, to know how much she really felt for him, and he'd have it too. He held her eyes for a long silent moment, then he smiled like a wolf and went in for the kill. Kissing her with assertive mastery, his lips parted over hers, hot, purposeful, and sensual, gauging the pressure and force giving her pleasure in order to yield from her flesh the appropriate degree of want. Sucking on her tongue, stroking her face, neck and arm, waiting for the moment she purred, breathless. Then he stopped. She looked flustered, her body shaking as she searched his eyes for the reason. She could barely manage the words over her laboured breaths as she asked, "What's the matter? Why have you stopped?" Her words more a strangled pant than articulate language. "Tell me." "What?" She asked, her words urgent and bated. "Why you decided to accept my offer," he said with a slow, torturous hand down over her neck and bust. "I can't," she groaned as he expertly fondled her breast through the thin layers of her silky muslin frock until her nipple stood erect, and he squeezed it between thumb and forefinger. She made a thrilled little sound deep in her throat, and her dark pupils engulfed the grey of her eyes. "Not even if I offer an incentive?" Shepherd asked with smiling lips over her neck as he licked at the little hollow between her collarbones. He nibbled until Theodora whimpered, clasped his skull and held him captive to her. He could hear the rasp of breath escape her lips as he pulled his teeth over the sensitive flesh at her jaw as he made his way back to her earlobe. Kissing tenderly with lips and tongue until her womb quivered, then he said, "What say you, my angel?" Yes. Incite you until you confess, or Shepherd, you're brilliant, don't stop," he asked once more with pause and eyes focused on hers with wicked grin. "You mean to torment me into telling you?" she asked, her eyes darting from his to where his hand held her breast in mid-caress. "Not torment, sweetheart. Coax. But I could stop altogether if you prefer," he said, and slowly lift his hands from her instantly bereft flesh. "I don't prefer, and well, you know it," she said miserably, and he was instantly sorry. It hadn't been his intent to rob her of her smile, but to titillate her into giving them both what they so clearly wanted. Now he would have to make amends. "Yes, I know it. Now tell me, if I show you how sorry I am, will you forgive me?" he asked with gaming smile, and she smiled back, for he was every so adorable when he was contrite. With that, sweet kisses and even sweeter torment was escalated to something Theodore could but marvel at. Shepherd lifted her onto his lap in one effortless move. Then his hands were everywhere as he kissed her in a sort of languid, arousing way. She could feel his right hand move up her stockinged leg, up past her knees over her thighs. Then his fingers were perched above the crisp, intimate hairs between her thighs, and he pulled his lips from her with a heated plea. "Let me in, sweetheart. Let me show you how good I can make you feel." Theodora could not imagine how he could possibly make her feel any better than she already did, her womanhood tingling as her body burned hot, causing her to trembling from the inside out. Still, she greedily rocked in her seat to allow him access, leaning in to kiss him only to gasp into his mouth when his finger flickered over the little hooded mound at the front of her pleasure centre. Her teeth sunk into his shoulders to stop from screaming in delight as he fondled her most intimate places, and all the while the door rested only on the hinges. She could hardly believe she was allowing him to touch her thus. she rocking in his lap against the unyielding muscles of his thighs, with his erection pressed against her right hip as he caressed bliss from her hot, wet flesh. The rapid increase of her breathing due to his proficient strokes made it difficult for her to first maintain his deep kiss and then hold his eyes as he parted her tender folds and inserted his finger. Stroking, rubbing and caressing until her inner muscles tightened around his nimble fingers and her breaths came on top of each other, and then she died a little. Her heart gave out and her skin fell away, then wave of elation, primitive and carnal, shook her body back to life. It had been more than she could bear, and while she was regaining focus, he made the sexuality intimate by licking her from his fingers. It was at once erotic and sweet, and she kissed him, tasting herself on his lips. It took them a full minute to recover laboured breaths and racing heartbeats. Then she, her pupils still dilated from want, held his focus in a silence that was both charged and comfortable. They lingered thus until she reached up and smoothed the soft curls of his short, cropped hair before saying, "You're so handsome I can hardly stand it." "Surely that is the most erotic thing ever said," he said with open delight. "Is it?" she asked in kind. "Yes, and now that you've said that to me, surely you can tell me why you have decided to accept my offer." "I'm afraid." "I don't know if it's the sort of thing I should admit," she said with suddenly sad, downcast eyes, and he took a hold of her hand and gave it an assuring squeeze. "Here, trust me." "I'll take care. You have my word," he vowed. "You made me smile so much so after our kiss in the garden that I resolved to call off my wedding to Daniel, but lost nerve in part because of the promise I made to him, but mostly due to fear it hadn't affected you in the same way. Now that you're here, I feel it must have. In some small way, but now I worry it won't be enough to base a marriage on. There is merit to your concern, and I can't offer you any guarantees it will be enough to build an entire marriage, but I can promise I'll endeavour to always put forth an effort to see you smile." She held a moment as if to measure whether to proceed. Then she said, "There is also the rumour of your pending engagement to Lady Eloise Spencer." "She was hand-picked by my Aunt Gertrude to be my wife, but I've never given her any cause to expect an offer," Shepherd assured her, but she was upset by this reveal. Her brilliant smile no longer reached her eyes, and he worried that she was drawing parallels between her failing with Somerset, with his circumstance, with Lady Eloise. He was one half right. Theodora was troubled by his revelation. She did not like that his Aunt Gertrude so favoured this young woman. Gertrude was a force of nature, and one with tremendous sway. She could make life very difficult for Theodora, and with her current standing in society already, so tentative, this could indeed be the beginning of some very unpleasant days for her. She was half in love with Shepherd, but she simply would not allow herself to be humiliated any further this season, and would have to be certain before proceeding any further. She had had to endure women like Gertrude the entire 9 years she'd been out in society and knew how cruel they could be. In fact, it brought to the forefront a few issues that had greatly affected her popularity, and all because of what they believed her physical form said about her as a person. In that, she was no different from anyone else. Everyone was judged on appearances in their society. The truth is, only social standing outweighed a pleasing form. Sadly, she was egregiously disproportioned due to a perversion of nature that had plagued her since the onset of puberty. She had a lush body that exuded sex, which one would think a blessing in a society where marriage is the only occupation for a lady of her station. It turned out that the kind of sex she exuded wasn't the marrying kind. No, it was more the kind that turned seemingly rational females into jealous, scorn-filled vipers, and the men in their presence into lecherous snakes. It had also caused her parents to be overly watchful, and she very conservative, particularly where her wardrobe was concerned. It also built in her a determination for others, particularly those that she cared about, to perceive her in the way she intended, as a complete human being who, though physically bountiful, was still capable of being small and vulnerable, but she needn't have bothered, for all she ever got for her effort was scorn. Theodora was convinced it was also the reason she was still unmarried at 23, and it had been the driving force behind her agreeing to marry Daniel. Yet here she was after all that, agreeing to marry a man she was certain was ripe with lust for her, but knew nothing of her soul. No, she would have revealed all of this to Shepherd and was about to address the matter when her mother entered the room ahead of her father. Her mother had some of those very concerns. "I was not even aware the two of you were acquainted," her mother said once Shepherd informed them of Theodora's willingness to marry him. "We met briefly at Lady Darby's ball earlier this spring," Shepherd explained. "And your family will have no objections to you offering for a lady left in disgrace?" the Viscountess continued suspiciously. She loved her daughter but entertained no delusions of the circumstance of her current standing and did not want her blindsided should that indeed be a possibility. "My choice is mine alone to make," Shepherd said with authority. "I'll take that to mean that you have yet to tell them." "Mother—" "Don't interrupt, Theodora," her mother chided without falter. "It's my duty to see that you come to no further harm, and there have long been rumours of an expectation from the Spencers for their Eloise." "Now, my dear," the Viscount said with pacifying hand on his wife's arm, "this is cause for celebration, not fretful suspicion." "You're right, of course," she agreed with measure. She was convinced that something was afoot, but would never do anything to shame her daughter. That did not mean she would not uncover what it was they were hiding from her. "I'm certain Lord Monthermer would not have come if he was expected elsewhere. The Spencer estate borders my grandfather's principal seat in Brighton, and it is true that our families had hoped I would consider Lady Eloise for marriage, but I assure you, I've given them no reason to believe me so inclined," Shepherd offered. "When will you present Theodora to your family?" the Viscountess asked to her husband's horror. "His lordship has given us no cause to question his word, my lady, and we will treat him with the respect he deserves," the Viscount admonished. "My lady," Shepherd said into the ensuing silence, "be assured that I do not take offence. In fact, I completely understand your apprehension after all you've been made to endure these last weeks, but please know that my intentions are honourable." "We know it," the Viscount said with a slightly embarrassed smile. His wife reiterated his point, and soon they were on to talk of wedding announcements, an engagement ball and a wedding date. They all agreed that in light of recent events it ought to be a small wedding with family and a few friends 6 weeks hence. She would be presented to his family in the coming week, and there would be an engagement ball hosted by her parents. It was all very tidy, and within an hour, Shepherd left a solemn Theodora, in company with her parents. They would marry 6 weeks later at St. Mark's near Oxford Street, in front of God and 6 of their nearest, but barring a few very scandalous carriage rides, the two were no allowed one moment alone together. There was, after all, a wedding to plan, and when she complained that she knew nothing of him, her mother said with authority, "You will have the rest of your life to get better acquainted with him." Still, she could not help but be apprehensive. She tried getting him alone for a few minutes at the engagement ball, and again before they attended the theatre with his grandfather and her parents, but to no avail. Then, on the afternoon she was summoned to his Aunt Gertrude's without any effort on her part, he turned up to escort her home. The tea had been brutal. It was a week before the wedding, and she had gone alone because her mother, who, by the way, had turned into a wedding-obsessed lunatic, was too busy organising the wedding breakfast with her new French chef to attend. Her father, that Judas, didn't even get out the carriage to see her inside. He delivered her to Lady Darby, a swarm of Shepherd female relations, the elegantly understated 19-year-old Lady Eloise, and the new Baroness Somerset, in Berkeley Square. They had all smiled prettily at her when she arrived and made pleasant enough conversation until she could take it no more. It was outrageous that they invited Violet after what she and Daniel had done to Theodora. It was very bad ton to have them in the same setting without first alerting her, and only her pride and breeding stopped her from creating a scene. She could not see the point to whatever it was that they were attempting now that the wedding was only days away. It was clear they had meant to terrorize her, but what she couldn't understand was why they had waited so long. Why not make the attempt once they were told in the days before the announcement was made public, when it could have made a difference? She couldn't make sense of it, but she was through pretending she wasn't wise to their attempt and decided to goad them into revealing their hand. Theodora took a breath, then addressed their leader, Lady Gertrude Darby. "I feel nothing but gratitude at your efforts on my behalf, and thank you, profoundly, my lady," she said in an instant of guarded silence. "You're welcomed and most welcome, dear," Gertrude said with a practiced smile. "It's a kindness I shan't forget, and though I will never be able to repay it in kind, I shall, the instant I've settled into marriage, extend just such an invitation to each of you," she said with relish. With her duty to her hostess out of the way, she proceeded to needle a reaction from them, for though she might never have their friendship, she would have their respect. "Particularly you, my dear Lady Eloise," Theodora said to a collective intake of watchful breaths. "I understand from Shepherd that your parents' estate in Brighton is but a stone's throw away from Huntley's, where we will settle once married, and since I have no friends there, I pray we could be friends." "I'm certain we would be brilliant friends," Eloise said with a charming smile. "Though I doubt it will be in Brighton, for you see, it's my hope to be married by season's end myself, and I can't guarantee it will be to a gentleman who resides in Brighton." "Of course, how silly of me. Do forgive it." Eloise didn't get chance to reply, for just then Lady Darby's butler arrived and announced Shepherd, who entered the room, took one look around and issued a terrifying glare to his aunt. He exchanged pleasantries with all before taking the seat next to Theodora, a move that would act as forerunner to a mass exodus of sorts. He could see what they were about, and had taken a hard line. That much was clear the instant he entered. In the end, it came down to either staying and supporting Gertrude or leaving and not alienating the future Marquis Huntley. In less than 10 minutes, only Violet and Eloise remained at Gertrude's side. All the others made quick their excuses and ran for the doors once they were gone, Shepherd offering Theodora his arm with, "Come, my dear, I've come to see you home in your father's stead." Gertrude made as if to rise and see them out, but thought better of it after a punishing look from Shepherd. Once outside in the carriage, Theodora asked, "How did you know to come just then?" "I saw your father at White's, and he told me he had delivered you there for tea, though, from the looks of things when I arrived, I'm not so sure you needed me there." "No, it was good you came and offered your support. It lets us all know without doubt where you stand. Surely you don't question my fondness for you." "I have nothing but questions about what it is you do feel for me," she said honestly. "I feel your eyes on me when I'm out of your reach, and it is as a caress, so I don't doubt that you ache for me. I know that because I feel just so about you." "And you feel there is fault in what there is between us?" "I don't know it's enough to base a marriage on, and I feel that it is probably what your aunt objects to." "Gertrude's only quarrel is that I'm out of her control," Shepherd with waited patience. "As for the rest, it's honest in a society where people marry for fortune, heirs, and because someone trapped them into it. I'd gladly settle for the honesty of our shared lust for each other." "The honesty of lust is as good a place as any to begin, I suppose," she agreed. She was not fully sold on his reasoning, but would push no further today, for he had just publicly declared his support for her. Besides, him saying what he did showed he cared enough for her to offer words of assurance. That, and she hadn't seen him outside a public setting for well over a month. He grinned at her as if he guessed her train of thought, and she smiled, then said, "There isn't time, Shepherd. Park Crescent is but a moment from Berkeley Square." He wasn't listening. He had come with something specific in mind and had instructed the coachman to take the scenic route. He pulled the curtains while holding her arrested with an unblinking gaze, and she pulled her bottom lip between teeth in a sort of give. "I lay awake at night for want of the taste of you," he said into the expectant silence. "Will you allow me to taste you, sweetheart?" She couldn't have imagined such a thing when she shook her head in acquiescence. It was benediction and unholy worship. Him kissing her lips in prelude and tender promise before exposing her breast, where he suckled until her womb quivered. She clasped him to her bosom and pressed her lips to his brow, his murmured words affecting her every bet as much as his confident, knowledgeable touch. So soft, so sweet. I will never get enough. You make me a glut. Tell you like my touch. Tell me you crave it. Can't live without it. She can't speak because his hands are on her naked breast, robbing her of coherent words, so all she is able to do moan in contentment, but he's obsessed by his need to hear her say she wants him. "Tell me of your desire," he says with eager nip at her tender erect nipple, and she gasps, her words lost to her passion. "Tell me how to touch you so I may build in you the fire that you've started in me," he pleaded with grazing teeth over her nearly painfully aroused nipple. "Tell me not to stop." "Don't stop," she said, her voice caught somewhere between excited rasp and adherent plea encouraging his hunger. "Don't ever stop." He touched her, and it was a memory long imprinted, left sedentary, waiting for the feel of her to wake it. This woman was made for him. He could see it written in her flesh, taste it in her essence, feel her heart. She was essential to his survival. First breath, living soul, raw passion. He was touching her as he did the afternoon she accepted his hand, his fingers cool and bold as they probed where she burned hot and wet. Then he held deliberately still, his eyes predatory and impassioned. Then he pushed up the hem of her frock until she was bare to his stare, appearing as an exotic flower in full bloom, his heated gaze causing her to offer brazenly. Touching herself as he had done, beckoning him with flush wanton flesh, while the soft flare of her bountiful hips signalling both fertility and blatant sexuality. Sex pouring from her as she delighted in the liberty his adoration had allowed. Shepherd could not look away, his eyelids heavy with want, his breath an eager pant as he watched without moving. Then he employed decisive movement, kneeling to burying himself between her legs. Kissing her unhurriedly, his tongue a light flicker over her aroused flesh. The delight of it transformed her breath to a shallow, continuous gasp. His ministration was sweet torment, and Theodora couldn't help but raise her hips to his kisses. Grabbing handfuls of his hair in both her fists, holding him prisoner as he laboured to bring her joyful end. He consumed her with fervent appetite, pulling from her breathy whispers, then his name. He rose, lifted her onto his lap, and cradled her in his arm until she came down from her rapture. She was slow to rise, her face nestled at his neck, the warm air inside the carriage now perfumed with what they had done, and the musk from the tight, barely contained coil of his body rose to mix with it to drive once more to want. She simply couldn't get enough of him, and pressed adherent little kisses along the exposed inch of his neck above his neckcloth. Pushing back his jacket and wriggling in her seat against his arousal, then suddenly it was too much for him to bear. He pled with her. "Be kind, sweetheart," he said with staying hand over her impatient ones. "I'll come undone, then there will be nothing left for us to do on our wedding night." "You've made me ravenous," she said lustfully and pressed her lips to his ears, then said, "Now feed me or I shall die." He captured her face in both his hands so he could look her in the eyes, then he said, "Be sure for this, here takes all my willpower, and I don't know that I'll be able to stop if you proceed any further." Theodora's answer to his lament was to lean in seductively and lick at his lips. Shepherd grinned, then said, "You only say that because you haven't given any thought to the actual logistics of it." "I said nothing," she said innocently while bathing his face with hot, breathy kisses. "I but offered motivation." "Yes, well, this will only work unless you are willing and able to take the reins," Shepherd said with wet, stimulating tongue over the soft, firm flesh of her still bare breast. "What say you, my sweetheart, to riding us both to oblivion?" "You will show me how," she asked, running her fingers over his lips and teeth until he pulled one the roaming digits in his mouth and sucked on it. Then he said, "I absolutely will." Theodora took hold of his meandering hand and licked at his fingers, then sucked on one of the ones he had used before to stimulate her to orgasm and it all but unravel him. Then she eagerly peeled off his jacket and waistcoat, sending with them her inhibitions to rest in the corner, kissing him breathlessly, squirming in his lap until he was forced to still her. "What's the matter?" "I'm overstimulated, and you writhing in my laps is pulling at my control," he explained, and Theodora, with mischief in her eyes, wriggled deliberately in his lap. "You behave, or there will be nothing for you to ride to your greedy end." "It's good I'm able to bring you to your knees the way you've done for me," she said with a little pride, and purposefully ran her hands over the rippling muscles of his flat stomach, wide chest, and around his neck. Theodora meant to do to him some the things he had done to her. She kissed him deeply and slowly, pulling his shirt from his trousers so she could drag her nails over the defined expanse of back. Then she lifted his shirt and suckled at his nipples, grazing over them with teeth and wet, flickering tongue until he growled. "You like that, I think." "I love that," he purred. "Shall I?" she asked, with agile fingers over the buttons of his trouser flap. "Oh, yes," he said enthusiastically. Theodora impatiently unfastened the buttons and freed him from the confines, her cool, excited fingers gingerly skirting over the taut silken skin of his masculinity. Shepherd tossed his head backwards, his entire body tensed, then shuddered, and she tightened her grip around the shaft, rubbing her thumb over the sensitive tip. "Christ, Thea! You're killing me," Shepherd said with sweet baritone roar, his teeth bare, his eyes awash before capturing her hands as he covered her mouth with his, sucking on her tongue. He fueled her want with his desire, kissing a line from her lips to the valley between her breasts, cupping, fondling, licking and sucking her nipples until she ran hot and wet between her thighs. Then she, with tortured whisper, said, "I'd say it was time you showed me how to hold the reins." Shepherd lifted Theodora so she sat astride and directly atop his throbbing erection, her wet entrance poised over his demanding sex as he teased, nudging forward by inches until she, impatient with want, impaled herself on the full length of him in one blindingly painful thrust. They held a while, her face slightly pale, and his furious red as they both reeled from the penetration, and had she been less aroused she might have reconsidered her position. But she was ablaze, and the bite of his penetration served only as fuel. Shepherd was losing his footing, waiting for Theodora to find hers. She was so tight and sweet around him, it was all he could do not to explode. The she took a breath and rocked tentatively, riding him slowly, at first getting the feel of him, adjusting her position in order to maximize the tiny waves of pleasure. Tightening her inner muscles about him to pull him closer to madness, while he flexed his thigh and grabbed her bottom, guiding her with a supportive hand on her hips. Then she sunk her teeth into his shoulder, pinching through fabric, skin and muscle as her body tightened in response to the mounting agony. He was magnificent. He filled her completely, moving with expert precision, feeling, to her, at once as velvet and steel, as their breath synchronized and ripples of ecstasy radiated from where they labored together. Thrusting with long, deep strokes, their bodies contracting and perspiration falling while agony merged with pleasure. Then orgasm, she crying out his name, his blissful grunt. "Honest and ours," Shepherd said once they had recovered breath, "but by no means the only reason I wanted to marry you. I like you beside I'm mad for you and am half in love with you and the way you make me feel. My life until I met you had been solely about taking care of my family. You made me make room for me." "Only half in love? Well, it will at least give me something to work towards on our wedding night," she said gleefully, and kissed him with all the love in her heart. They would go on 2 more such rides before their wedding, only then a week hence, and that only because her mother's demands on them did not allow for more. Still, In spite of this and his dire warning of then having nothing left to do on their wedding night, neither could wait to abandon their wedding guests for more private accommodations once the vows were spoken. Harry left for America 3 months after their wedding. He wrote obsessively to their grandfather, who missed him just as much, and wrote back long, rambling letters of complaint about his pending death. Though Theodora never received apology from Daniel and Violet, she forgave them after they fought courageously to take the love they found. It will never excuse what they had done to her, but it freed her to find the happiness she now shared with her darling shepherd, and for that, she would always be grateful to them. Gertrude still struggled with the fact that Shepherd did not marry the woman she felt perfect for him, but she loved him, and tried, although begrudgingly so, to accept Theodora. 3 months after their first anniversary, Lord and Lady Shepherd Monthermer welcomed into the world their daughter Elena Grace, a howling ink-black-haired child, and her brother Montgomery Maximilian with like hair, who seems to have a calming effect on his sister. All are happy and well. By Simone Ogilvie.